Okay, good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, getting a new mimer, 140, discourse number 140, on page 1168, Aleph Kuf Samaches. Yeah, we're winding down this second volume here. I never thought we'd get there. Okay. So yesterday we concluded the mimer 139. This would be the last Tishrei that the Rabbi would be in Lubavitch, because as we'll talk about later, after Parsha Vayera, after Tishrei, after the Yom Tovim that year, the Rebbe Rashab moved permanently away from Lubavitch to Rostov. So this would be the last Tishrei there. These are Maimorim that the Rebbe Rashab said in the year 1915, because it was still 1915, the end of 1915. So we're talking about Sukkot, now we're going to Shmini Atzeres Maimer. So what we learned yesterday was the summation where the Rebbe Rashab explained the idea of Das Elyon and Das Tacht in the context of the Daled Minim. L'kachtem lechem b'yem harishin, that essentially the kavonos of the Daled Minim, it's about bringing the perspective of Das Elyon into Das Tacht and Malchus. That's the Daled Minim. And on all the levels. The perspective from above, because Das Tacht at the end of the day is what he called Bittul HaYesh. There's a Yesh, and the Yesh is subjugated and sublimated to the Ayin. But we want to introduce Bittul B'Mitzias, a level where the only thing that exists is the divine, and existence itself is a novelty and an Ayin compared to the Yesh Amiti, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and that's done through the Daled Minim. Why the Daled Minim? Because they all have the personality of Achdus within them, of unity, and Achdus is caused by Bittul, like he says. You do it, the words he used were exactly these words. Do you do the Achdus u'mitzad ha-Bittul? So unity is due to Bittul. So in other words, these species manifest this level of Bittul, which allows the drawing down from Das Elyon to Das Tacht. So we spoke about it. One of our colleagues, I asked him to sent me a nice analysis, which I think is very solid, in explaining, because I had asked the question whether other species have also unity in them, and they may have, but nevertheless, these four have them, and that's why these four were chosen. He also suggested, if you don't mind, I'll tell you what he said. He said that perhaps the four different species indicate on four different types of unity. One in time, like the Esrig is about the Tkufas Hashana throughout the year. One is so it's a unity that unites the entire year, despite what season, winter, summer, spring, and autumn. The Arava, he said, Achdus and Mokim, in space where it grows. That's good. They grow in a place which is, like he said, like we said, Ba'achvana, they grow in a certain place. The Hadas is, I'm not sure what he meant. I'm not sure the other two. If the first is time and space, what would you...
all the three are coming out from the same place in the leaf.
Okay, you good? Yeah, fine. Anyway, post it if you don't mind. Naftali, post it on the group, and everybody can then look into it. Okay, with that, we now move to Maimer 140 on page Aleph Kuf Samaches 1168, which, as we're going to see in this Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain Das Elyon, Das Tachten, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Ayin Yesh Nivra, yet on another way. That's going to be that Atzilus is primarily Das Tachten, and higher than Atzilus is Das Elyon. We learned in the previous Maimer, and I summarized it yesterday, that Atzilus, the beginning of the Maimer, he said Atzilus is Das Elyon, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and Biyah is the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. Then he explained that in Atzilus itself you have both. So now he's going to explain how Atzilus is now connecting more to the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. But let's not jump it. I'm just giving you an overview. The Frierdiker Rebbe's words in describing the teichen of this Maimer, I'm reading from the beginning. He says, last Maimer, the teichen was Beis Deis Belakuz Gufa. This Maimer 140, he says, Klolis ha'eses spheres b'shvil hagili be'elamus. That the primary role of the 10 spheres is in order to bring Gilui into the world. That's the Frierdiker Rebbe's summary. So let's begin. The Seyeti Deshmaya Shmini Atzeres Atru. That's Tofrei Shayim Vav, written in a different order. And the Rebbe Rasha begins. Again, this is the beginnings of each Maimer that the Rebbe Rasha added afterwards. So it's of course a Shmini Atzeres Maimer. Shmini Atzeres Tiyalachem. Shmini Atzeres Tiyalachem. Meaning on the 8th day, meaning the 8th day after 7 days of Sukkot, should be an Atzeres for you. Atzeres has many different meanings, but basically a Chag, a time where you still don't do work. It's another Yom Tov. The Isa b'Medrash Rabbah, Moshe L'Melech, to explain Shmini Atzeres, the Medrash gives us an example of a king. She'osa Suda Zayin Yomim, v'zimen kol b'nei HaMedina b'shivas yimei HaMishta. He organized a Suda, a festive meal, for 7 days and invited all the people of his nation, of his Bnei HaMedina, of his empire, of his all his subjects, Bnei HaMedina, in 7 days of celebration. This, of course, corresponds to the 7 days of Sukkot. So essentially, Sukkot is the king hosting a Suda for all the people of his kingdom. Then comes B'Yem HaShmini, on the 8th day of after 7 days of meals, of this Suda, Shivas Yimei HaMishta, 7 like a 7-day Mishta, 7 days of celebration. He said, B'Yem HaShmini, the Medrash continues, on the 8th day, Omer lo Oyhavai. He says to his beloved, the king says to his beloved, Kfar Yotzanu Yudeinu L'Bnei HaMedina. We already did our part. We did our obligation for the people of the kingdom by giving them this party, this celebration, the 7 days. Now, on this 8th day, he says to his beloved one, now you and I, let us, negalgal means let us celebrate together, or let us dance together, or let us hang out together. A lot of different ways you can translate negalgal. It means that basically is
roll around.
Huh?
Roll around.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean roll physically. He means we should hang out. We should
Rub shoulders,
frolic together. There's a lot of different ways you can say negalgal. Basically, is the expression he's saying now. In other words, the Bnei HaMedina are the king's subjects, and he made a party for them. But now he's speaking to his beloved and saying the party is over. Now you and I, let us hang out together. Let us be together.
backstage party.
Or maybe more of an intimate party. After Sheva Brachas, the husband and wife go off on their own. And after all that, I thought you were more romantic. Okay. Aniva Ata.
He's
interesting
two not usual word. B'mesha timtza.
I know, B'mesha timtza is an interesting, in other words, to use whatever we can find. I don't know, but does he mean the shirayim left over from the 7 days? Or B'mesha timtza, whatever way we can do this?
Whatever you want. B'mesha timtza, not shenimtza.
Yeah. Al Kapam, that's the Medrash. So the Medrash continues. This is the Moshel. Now, what's the Nimshel? Kach, same thing. Just like we gave this Moshel. Kach, B'zayin Yemei Achag. In the 7 days of Sukkot, of the holiday, Hikrivu Ayin Porim Neged Ayin Sodim. So we know 70 cows, 70 Porim are offered. Bulls. That's correct. Bulls that correspond to the 70 ministers that represent the 70 nations. So we say it even in davening. The first day you have 13 and then 12. Bottom line, 70 in the 7 days of Sukkot. It's not 10 each day. It goes down each day. So it's a total of 70. That corresponds to the 70 nations. Or Sarim means the ministers that represent the nations. That's the Bnei Medina. And then, B'yem Hashmini, Yom HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Remember, there's a mashal and an imshal. Then on the 8th day, Hashem, God says to Israel, which is of course his beloved, Bo v'negalgal ani v'ata b'mesha timtzeu. You and I come join together. Let us celebrate together. Let us frolic together. B'mesha timtzu. Now he says timtzu, not timtzeh. Par echad ayel echad. So in Pashtus it means with what you have, which is one bull and one steer. How do you translate ayel?
Ram.
Okay. One bull and one ram. So Shmini Atzeres is only one. Through the 7 days of Sukkot, 70. Now it's only one, but it's not a numbers game. This one is the quality that is Hashem and the Jewish people, God and the Beis, it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Yisrael are celebrating together this meal of one bull and one ram. The Tzarech Lahavin, this is the Medrash. The Rebbe Rashab now asks, with Tzarech Lahavin, and we need to understand, Maui Inyan, what is this Inyan Shebezayin Yemei Achag, that the 7 days of the holiday, Hikrivu Karbonos Neged Ayin Sorim. What is the teichen of this? What is the meaning that on Sukkot, on the 7 days, we bring offerings to correspond with the 70 nations, the 70 ministers? Ubishmini Atzeres Uli Yisrael Levad. And Hashmini Atzeres, it's only for Israel alone. Sheikrivu par echad ayel echad. What's the significance of this? I mean, it's a nice statement, but what does it mean? What's the teichen hadvar? So it's one question. He begins B'yem Hashmini Atzeres, brings the Medrash, and asks this single question. Okay, good. Now we continue where he's going to summarize. He says, to understand this, one needs to preface what was explained earlier. The Beis Deis, that the two perspectives, Das Elyon v'das Tachten, the perspective from above and the perspective from below, hein be'elakus gufe. They're in the divine itself. You have both perspectives. Remember, initially, das Tachten and das Elyon, das Elyon would be how the Eibishter sees existence. Das Tachten is how existence sees the Eibishter, elakus. But then we established, no, it says, Kael Deus Havaya. In Havaya, there's two Deus. You have to say, therefore, in elakus itself, there's the perspective how godliness is above existence and looks at it. And there's the godliness that manifests and relates to existence. The ayin of the Yesha Nivra is Das Tacht. That's Be'elakus Gufa. Yeah. Ubederech Klal, and in general, what are these two perspectives? B'chinas Malchus, who b'chinas Das Tachten. That was like the last thing he said in the last Maimer. Malchus is the level of Das Tachten. V'chochma Das Elyon. Remember, Chochma Lo, Chochma Tata. So in Atzilus, Malchus is Das Tachten, it's relating to Biyah, to existence. And Chochma of Atzilus, the highest, Reishis Hagilui, the first sphere of Atzilus, is the Das Elyon. Obviously, there were other explanations as well, but he's giving us the Derech Klal. The Chen B'Chochma, now he brings another interpretation. And the same in Chochma itself, Yesh Gamkin Beis HaMadregas. In Chochma, the Atzilus itself, there's two levels. There are these two levels. V'hu, B'chins Chitzenis HaChochma, U'Primis HaChochma. The outer dimension of Chochma, remember, like he said, like Chitzenis HaTeirah, the outer dimension of Chochma is already a Gilui, La'atzmei at least. So it's already relating to existence. Whereas in Keser, he said the stimulus, it's not even relating, even to La'atzmei, it's not yet a Gilui. And Chochmei Law, he said, was the bittul of Chochma. That Chochma is in a state of bittul of Ayin, Chochma ma'ayin temotze, like a color of water, that it's a colorless color. Mitzad atzmus hamaitzel sheba Chochma. So Chochma itself had two levels. We learned this in the previous page, on page 1167. Okay. U'kamoy came b'ha'oyer b'chlal, and the same, these two levels we just mentioned, in Oyer in general, you have these two things. Mitzad adveikus be'erin sof ha'maitzil hu b'bchinas das elyon. Since Oyer is attached and cleaves with the source, mitzad in the core emanator, atzmus ha'maitzil, mitzad that it's b'chinas das elyon, perspective from above, u'mitzad shu moker ha'isavos. And due to the fact that the Oyer is also the source of creation, hu b'chinas das tachten. So it has an element in it that it's a das tachten that relates to existence. This is what he said more on page 1166 in Oyer itself. So you see, he's clearly not saying Eiris and Kalim, whatever reason that is, even though you could technically explain it that way too. He says in Oyer itself, you also have both levels. Okay. Now the Rebbe Rashab continues. That's a summary of what we learned. Now he continues. Omnom, however, he's now going to qualify that you have to say there's more going on. Omnom ma'amaimer d'Eliyahu, olav hasholem. He's going back to Pasach Eliyahu of the Tikkun Ezer. Remember in the last maimer, he brought it a number of times. Back in the bottom of page 1162, he explained Antu Chad v'lei b'chushban. He explained Antu dafikas eser tikkunin v'karin alon eser sfirin. He explained tikkunin and sfiras, and then he explained even on page 1164, he brought that the levushim of Atzilus are atzmim, united. And he brought levushim tikkinuslon, the levushim of biyah. But he never went back to that topic. He's going back to that now. If you remember, he only explained how the levushim, the garments in Atzilus, are attached, like the koiches hanefesh, or like the branches of the tree. But he never went back. What about biyah? In Pasach Eliyahu, he also speaks about biyah. So he's now going to go back. So he says, from the Maimed Eliyahu, which is basically the Maimed Eliyahu, is the discourse of Eliyahu, which we say in Pasach Eliyahu. What does it say? Antu dafikas eser tikkunin, that you are the one from which emerges, remember the 10 tikkunin, the 10 garments, lanhoge behin almin, to rule and govern the worlds. Mashma, from that maimer, from that statement in Eliyahu's, it appears the kol eser sfiras d'atzilus hem b'shvil elam is biyah. Interesting. The fact that it says lanhoge behin almin, he doesn't say there's two aspects to the Eiris, to the Sfiris of Atzilus. Yes, he uses the expression tikkunin, which is garments, and the expression Sfiris, Sfiram, which the Rebbe Rashab explained is the two elements in the Sfiras themselves. But he says one final statement, that all of these Sfiras are lanhoge behin almin. Their whole role is to govern the worlds. In other words, why did these 10 spheres emerge? Afikaslon, from the Antu Chad, to govern and relate to the worlds. So in other words, you don't see the aspect in the Oyer of Dveikus of expressing Das Elyon. They're only b'shvil elam is biyah, lanhoge behin almin. U'kamoishin is bar li'il dibra maskal nachamu. I'm going to explain this. So bear, if you don't get it yet, I'll explain what's true. Let's read inside. Like we learned earlier, what was explained earlier in the Maimer Nachamu. You know where this is? Look at the bottom. Volume 1, page 81. He's going back now almost 1,500 pages. Oh, no. We're now at 1168, 81, basically 1,000 pages back. What do we learn there? B'Shem HaPardes, as I told you, whenever the Rebbe Rashab does that, you know that he's tying together Ayin Beis and showing us the connections between different Maimorim. We're going back 1,000 pages to here. I've already pointed out last Maimer, you see a lot of connection to the early Maimorim especially the beginning of Ayin Beis with Atzilus and so on. So what do we learn in Nachamu, in the Maimer Nachamu? B'Shem HaPardis, that was explained there, the name of the Pardis. Pardis is the Pardis Remainim. It's the sefer, the magnum opus of the Ramak, Ramosha Kardaviro, who was a colleague of the Arizal, a little older than him. So the Pardis, what B'Shem HaPardis, that what? The Gam Chochma Bina, Ima Yesim Nestoris. The Pardis says that also Chochma Bina, even though they're called Nestoris, remember the last page? Nestoris Lashem Elokeinu. It's Yudke. They're Nestoris because they're not yet related. It's a Gili La'atzmei. When you're using your mind, it's concealed from everyone around you. It's not a Gili Lazulas. Mides is a relationship with another. When I do Chesed, I'm doing Chesed to someone. I'm being kind to someone. Meichin Chochma Bina is Nestoris because it's only to yourself. So he says, the Pardes says so. Even though Chochma Bina are Nestoris, so therefore you could seem to think that they're not related to existence because they're not yet revealed. Nevertheless, they're also emanated Netzal for the purpose of the worlds. So now we speak in the other side of things, that even the highest levels in Atzilus, the Sefiros, Chochma and Bina, even though they're Nestoris on one end, but they're also there as God's instruments in order for the worlds, for the purpose of the worlds. The Bichdei explains, Sheyeh inyan hayediyah be'elamis. Why do we need Chochma and Bina and Atzilus? Because in order for there to be an awareness, for us to have yediyah, knowledge of God in the worlds, remember the worlds are concealed. The Elikus is concealed. So how do we have yediyah be'elamis? Ubefrat yediyah lekis. Interesting. He says, Bechlal yediyah, knowledge. And specifically divine knowledge. That's through the fact that God emanated from within himself the power of intelligence of Chochma and Bina. I'm not sure why he doesn't say Das, but it doesn't matter. Bottom line is Chochma and Bina. So in other words, let's go back to the fundamental principle of the interface of Atzilus. What is the story with Atzilus? Atzilus remembers an interface. On one hand,
that is a different thing. He wants to say here that the Chochma Bina, we cannot get it without the Atzilus, but that everything is for us.
How are you answering my question? And how do we have Yediyah? Isn't the Yediyah called Das?
Because Das is not Yediyah. Das is a different thing. It's an important thing, but here he's talking about the knowledge.
To me, Yediyah is Das, Havana is Bina, and Chochma is Chochma. So fine, if that satisfies you, good. I'm not sure. I have to look it up back in Nachamu. So anyway, continuing on. So we learned that Atzilus is a mamutza, an interface between higher Elikus, that's higher than structure, and structure. So Atzilus is what provides us the landing ground, that interface where Elikus is manifesting through Chochma and Bina. So b'meila we in Biyah and the lowest worlds can now access through Atzilus and have Yediyah in general, he says, and specifically Yediyah in Elikus. Yediyah Elikis. Not Yediyah in Elikus, Yediyah Elikis, divine knowledge. So that's what's based on the Pardis. So what do we see from this? That the Sefiros, all of them, Alan Hoga Bahin Alman, they're all for the purpose of the worlds. So in other words, we'll soon see where he's going with this. Obviously, he wants to make the case that based on the Pasuk Aliyah, when you break it down, even the highest levels of Chochma and Bina are not Das Elyon. They relate to Das Tachtin. Let's see where it goes. The Bichdei in Yadul and there's no Bichin Chochma Bina. Commission is barely ill. Another mimer now. Like it was explained earlier, Dibra Masl Vayera Elov. Vayera Elov, wow. Where's that mimer? That's a long. Vayera Elov. Yeah. That's mimer in the same volume. Oh, wow. Basically, page 721. Also nice, 400 pages back. What did he say there? The Chochma Bina hu inyan hayediyah v'asaga b'elikus. That from Chochma Bina comes the yediyah v'asaga, the awareness and the knowledge and comprehension in godliness. That's Chochma Bina Vatzilus allows us that. Umhamidis al yenis, and from the supernal midis, who inyan ahergish aliki. From there, that's the inyan of having a feeling in the divine, a divine feeling. Sheyesh b'kol echad ve'echad. That's the divine feeling that each person has, every individual has. In Yiddish, a get lecher der her, a divine resonance, a divine awareness der her. It's hard to translate that der her, but it basically means more than hearing. It's like der her is that you've a deeper resonating feeling of the divine. So let me explain. If we didn't have Atzilus, you'd have a big challenge. Some would say, okay, how does a Yesh HaNivra connect to Elikus without it being a miracle? As we spoke a number of times, God could do whatever he wants. He can create existence without Atzilus, without Bria, Tzira, Siya, without without Tzimtzum, without Ishtalshus, nothing. But he wanted there to be a relationship that makes sense in the structure that God created. So therefore, you have a big question. If me and my teacher have nothing in common, then how can he be my teacher? How could I have a relationship with him? Atzmus, we know, is lav iu midus iu klal. He b'klal is not defined by any structure. You can't say atzmus, or even the highest levels of Oyer. Oyer in general is defined by Chochma Bina Das, as the Maral, who disagrees with the Rambam, who says, Hu amadu hu yidei yidua. He says the Eibush is higher than Das. But the Eibush created Atzilus. And here is where they meet. It's like exactly, why could God not have V'shachanti b'seichem without a Beis HaMikdash, without a Mishkan? Because it wouldn't make sense to us. Where is he residing, so to speak? We need a meeting place. So Atzilus is the perfect meeting place. Because the Eibush emanates from within himself. He's not defined by Chochma Bina, but he's also not limited not to have Chochma Bina. He's the source of everything. So he emanates a thing called Chochma and a thing called Bina. These are godly emanations, Netzalim, divine Netzalim. But they're now in the form of Chochma and Bina, as we learned in the previous Maimon. Even the Oyer has a Oyer HaChochma Eir HaBina. Now, the existence, meaning the Yesh HaNivra, has Koiches HaNefesh. We have Chochma Bina Das Chesed all the way through Malchus. Nishtal Shlu Mehen, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, our faculties evolved from the 10 spheres, the Esser Spheres, onto the Afikas Esser Tikkunin. So now we have a place to meet. So we're meeting that since God is manifested in Chochma, and Araisim a Chochma Nafkas, let's say. Torah manifests God's Chochma, and so when we learn Torah and we use our minds, we are now aligning, and we have Yediyah, we are aligning our minds to God's mind. When we do Chesed, when we have not when we do Chesed. Oh, well, also that. How do we have a feeling in godliness? Because God manifested itself in Chesed and Gvura. So we can have a feeling of Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, like Chochma and Bina, gives us the intelligence that we can have a divine understanding of the divine. We could also have a hergish leki, like he says, get l'chederher, through the midas elyenis of Atzilus. So now that explains what the purpose of the spheres are. It's completely for us. So it's basically all relating to us to give us the ability to connect through mind, through our cognitive and our emotional faculties. Okay. So what do you see from this? So all the 10 spheres, starting from Chochma, are all for the purpose of the worlds. They have no purpose of their own. It's only to give us divine awareness and divine hergish feeling. So basically what the Rebbe Rashab is saying now, we spoke earlier that the Oyer has dveikus, and the higher levels, Primis HaChochma, is more about Elikus. From the Tikkunei Zeir itself, it appears, Mashma, he says, that the purpose of the spheres is not about expression of the divine. It's about us experiencing the divine. Now, obviously, it's not a contradiction. We understand that. But the Rebbe Rashab is digging deeper and digging down to explain exactly what the role of the Sefiros are in the context of Das Elyon and Das Tachton. So it's not over yet. This is just the beginning. It started with an omnam, because he's explaining now, when you look into the Tikkun Zeir, it's mashma like this, but it's not over. Now he goes to Tikkun Zeir, Tikkun Zeir, Tikkun Samachtes. This is a different Tikkun Zeir. Pasuk Eliyahu is the Hagdama of Tikkun Zeir. Tikkun Zeir is made up of sections, but they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and the Hagdama to Tikkun Zeir itself is on Parshas, Zeir on Parsha Bereshis, Noach, Lech Lecha, and so on. Tikkun Zeir, which is really Tikkun Zeir, was like found afterwards. It's basically Tikkun Zeir. That's what it means. It's additional elements to the Zeir. So Pasuk Eliyahu is the introduction to Tikkun Zeir, but now he's quoting another Tikkun Zeir, Tikkun Samach Tes. So it's divided by Tikkunim. Tikkun Samach Tes means the section 69. There he says, Tikkun Zeir, Tikkun Samach Tes, Choshiv. There he counts Kol Esor Sefiros B'Tevas Bereshis. He spells out how all the 10 spheres are in the word Bereshis. If you want, I could tell you what they are. If I recall correctly, how's it in Bereshis? You have everything from Chochma to Malchus. I think it goes like this. I think Bara is Chochma and Bina. I have to look it up, sorry. But Al Kapanim, he finds in the word Bereshis all the 10 spheres, which is only supporting what he's saying now. That means all the 10 spheres are part of Bereshis Bara Lakim. So he says, V'emer, Hakulu Eser, that these are all of them are 10 in the word Bereshis. Im Chos Echad Lo Yishtalim Bria. If Bereshis would not have all 10, if one would be missing, you don't have the complete creation. So he clearly is associating Esor Sefiros with creation. Hare. Again, he says, Shekol Esor Sefiros and Letzerich Habriya Vayesavos. So the Tikkun Zeir supports what we just said from the Pardes, that all the 10 spheres, if one was missing, the Briya would not be complete. So it means all the 10 spheres are Letzerich, are for the purpose of creation and Hisavos. I explained the difference between creation and Hisavos generally is Briya is like Yesh Ma'ayin. The creation of something, Hisavos is bringing it into being, Mahava. But generally they're in the same category. So you see from the Tikkun Zeir also associated the 10 spheres to Bereshis. Now the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain, so why then does it say that the Chochma Bina is Nistaris? Why are they concealed? All 10 spheres are about revealing godliness. One is revealing intellect, like we said, Yediyah and Hasog and Elikus, and one is the Midas, Hergish. So he says, Rak Yesh Lemer. You can, only thing is, you can explain, you can say, the Mechochma Bina Nisavu Nivroim the Alma Diskasia. So all the 10 spheres are for the creation of existence. The only difference is that from Chochma and Bina is the creation of the hidden worlds. She'enu b'chinas mitzias davar. They're creation, but they're not yet a mitzias davar. Like in the Gashmis, it's like the world of the sea. Yam. Alma Diskasia. It's called the hidden worlds. Why are they hidden? Because they exist, but they're not yet of substance. They're concealed. But they are part of Bereshis Bara. So B'mela, actually, now I remember. He says in the word Bereshis, all 10 spheres. In another place it says, Bereshis Bara Lekimas HaShamayim V'Sa'aretz are the 10 spheres. Bereshis is Chochma, B'Chochmasa. Bara is Bina. Elikim, I believe, is Bereshis Elikim. is das, S is za. No, my mistake. Bereshit is bara, Elikim is what? I'm not sure. S, Hashemayim is za, the S is Yesod, and S haaretz is Malchus. But that's in the Posuk. I'm not sure. I have to look in the Tikkun Zeir. That I do remember how it's counted. But upon him, what he's saying now is he's distinguishing. So everything is L'tzedech Elemus. All the 10 spheres are for the creation of existence. The only thing you can say is that from Chochma and Bina is the creation of the hidden worlds. Umeir behem Gilei Elikus. So it's worlds, but in them radiate a divine revelation. Vehem yuchadim b'mkeram. And that creation is united with its source, like fish are completely united with their source in water.
Bia only, right?
He doesn't say biyah. He says
because it
Almi
started
discuss.
that the whole entire Atzilus is bishvil olam as biyah. That's how
Yeah.
it started.
Yeah. Well, that's all there is, biyah. There's nothing else. But he's explaining the difference. He says they're all for the bria. The difference is Chochma and Bina is for Almi Discuss, creates Almi Discussia. The Za Umalchus and the other Esespheres. These are the first two. The other 6, 7. Za and Malchus, Hein Sheirish Shemokar Almi Disgalia. They're the root and the source of the revealed worlds. Shem B'Bchinis Metzias Davar, in contrast to the hidden worlds of the ocean, of the sea. They are of substance, like land, Yabosha, Chulu.
Rabbi, can you translate Skia?
Hidden, Discussia.
Thank you.
Hidden worlds. I translated already. Hidden worlds. Is in Hebrew, Gilui is Galia is Aramaic for Gili, revealed. Iskasia is Aramaic for Kisui, for Mechusa, for concealed, covered up. Basically, the best example is sea and land. When you look at the sea, it covers up everything inside the sea. And the creations, the creatures and the species under the sea bed, under the sea surface, are all within and concealed. The world of land, you see everything. You see the trees, you see the mountains, you see the creatures. So it's called revealed worlds. They're both creations. So therefore, so he's only explaining that the difference between the Bereshis, Lanhoge Behin Alman, of Chochma and Bina relates to the hidden worlds. And Zohar Malchus is to the revealed world, which makes sense. Because remember, Chochma and Bina are nistoris. They're only a revelation of Achshava. They only are a revelation to yourself. So from the Machshava of Hashem that's revealed to himself was created. The hidden worlds that are therefore connected, like Machshava is connected to the self. Dibur is already like revealed words. That Zohar Malchus, that creates the revealed worlds that have substance and are revealed not just to yourself, but also to another. So you have now another. So if it was only, so bottom line is everything relates, the tzedek is for the purpose of creation. He's only explaining the difference between Meichin and Midas. And delve into what it says in Likutei Torah, Dibur HaMaschil, the first mime in Likutei Torah. Ru'u ki Hashem nosen lechem HaShabbos. So look what it says there in the mimer. The mimer begins, Ru'u ki Hashem nosen lechem HaShabbos, be'inyan elam hazeh ve'elam haba. Look there to what he discusses about this world and the world to come. The biyud nivra elam haba. The Gemara says, Yud K. Yud nivra elam haba. The Yud of Yud K Vav K, with that the world to come was created. Bechinas alma diskasya, the world of the hidden worlds. Elam hazeh hu bechinas alma disgalia. And elam hazeh comes from the hey. Behei nivra elam hazeh, it says. So the shosham the bechinas Vav K. Actually, here he's not saying that. There he says Yud Nivra Elam Haba, and now he's saying Vavke is the source for Alma Disgalia. Because some places it says Behei Nivra Elam Haza. But here the Hey is Bina. So he's not using the Hey. He's saying the Yud Nivra Elam Haba and the Vavke, Haniglas Lanu Libnenu, is the source for Alma Disgalia.
How does he go from explaining the Ten Sefiros and their existence for the purpose of governing this world? Then he goes into the Shem Havaya. You just switched from one conceptual framework to the Shem Havaya. I didn't understand that bridge, or why is he going into that?
Well, remember the Rebbe Rashab is stating ideas that he already discussed earlier in the 1167 pages before this, and he's also relying that we know certain basic concepts, but it's a fair question, and I'll answer it. So I'm just saying that the Rebbe Rashab is assuming we know what I'm going to say right now. And
of course, I jumped into the course very late, so I'm sorry if it's a bad question.
I just said to you it's a good question. I didn't say it's a bad question, but listen to the answer, and it'll help. The Rebbe Rashab is relying on what we've already learned, so now I'm going to spell it out. It's a fine question. No question is a bad question, by the way. The question is whether the question relates to this Maimar or to other Maimar, but every question is a good question. Regarding this, basically, we're talking about the divine that relates to existence. We're not talking about existence. It says the spheres are divine instruments. They're divine attributes that God uses l'anhoga behel alman to create and govern and for the worlds. Like we just explained, that the spheres allow the worlds, us, to relate to God through our minds, understanding godliness and feeling godliness. That's what he stated. Now, in the process itself, how does this creation take place? So there's the Yud K Vav K. All the four worlds correspond to Yud K and Vav K. So Yud K and Vav K is another form of saying God manifests through these four letters as he creates existence. So Yud K Vav K is just another way of saying the 10 spheres. If the spheres break down, Chochma is Yud, Bina is Hey, Midas is Vav, and the last Hey is Malchus. So what he's saying here is the following, that after explaining how the spheres are all in order to create existence, only distinguishing that Meichin, Chochma and Bina create the hidden worlds, and Midas and Malchus, Zor and Malchus create the revealed worlds. So he's bringing proof from L'Kutei Torah, B'Shalach,
how it comes together.
That he brings that the Yud is like Chochma creating the hidden worlds, Olam Haba, and the Vavke is creating the revealed worlds, Olam Hazeh. That's the connection. Okay. V'zeu shekosav lanhoge behein almin stimin the lo yizgalian v'almin disgalian, and that's what the Taka says in the Tikkun Ezeiah. Going back, lanhoge, we have both worlds. It governs. Lanhoge means more than just governs. Here, clearly, about lanhoge means it's also for the purpose of the worlds. In other words, it's not just creating them, but also giving them the ability to relate to godliness. So in other words, God's connection with the worlds is not just creating the worlds and applying himself to create, it's also embedding into the spheres the ability that gives us the ability that the creation should be able to connect to God.
Almost like programming.
So Lanhoga ben Alman, so he says Almin Stimin, the concealed worlds, the Lo Yizgalian that are not revealed, the Almin Disgalian. So now the Rebbe Rashab has given us some further explanation in Pasuk Eliyahu that all the spheres are there for the purpose of the worlds. The only difference is Chochma and Bina relates more to the concealed worlds, and Midas and Malchus, Zohar Malchus relate to the revealed worlds. Ulafiza, continuing on, and according to this, the general framework of the 10 spheres of Atzilus, Ayin. So based on this, it's very clear that the general framework of the 10 spheres are the level of the Ayin that relates and associates with the Yesh HaNivra. That's what means Lahan Haga Behein Almin. The Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, as we learned, its primary purpose is what? Is expressing godliness. It's the divine expression, period. Here, the 10 spheres is Lan Haga Behein Almin, the concealed and the revealed worlds. So the general spheres therefore relate that level relates to the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. When you dig deeper. Generally speaking, he explained that the 10 spheres have both elements. That was last mimer. Chochma Ilah, Chochma Tata, in Chochma itself, in the Oiris of Atzilus. But now he says from the Tikkun Izayah, when you say Lahan Hoga Bein Alman, it's clear, he says, that the whole Esser Spheres is connected to the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. It's not a contradiction, which we'll explain later, but just this is what he's going, as I said, Rebbe Rashab is coming to help us locate and find the two levels of Ayin everywhere possible, because we need as many stepping stones as possible to connect to the divine, as we discussed in the previous classes. Okay. So lefiza closest is that still some b'chinas ayin hashayich la yesh hanivra. Now he's going to bring further proof, or further. I don't want to say the word proof is not the right word. Further, building further the case that the 10 spheres are connected to the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. And he's going to bring this from the Kalim of Atzilus now. So now he's going to get into a discussion of the difference between the Kalim and the Oiris. So V'gam, additionally, to make the case that the 10 spheres are connected to the worlds, Hare HaKalim d'Atzilus, Harehem b'chinas mitzias davar. The Oir, you could argue, perhaps has an element that's higher than the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. I'm adding that myself. The Rebbe Rashab doesn't say it explicitly. But by the Kalim, there's no question. They're Metzias Davar. The Kalim have clear identity. The whole purpose of the Kalim, we learned, was to give identity and definition to Chochma and Bina and so on. So the Kalim are Metzias Davar. Remember, Metzias Davar doesn't mean a physical entity. It means a spiritual entity, but an entity. Shari Yeshnam la Esser Spheres b'Metzias. What are the Kalim telling us? That the Esser Spheres, here again he uses the word Yeshnam, that they are actual existent entities. Let me explain this. This is important. There's a Shita in Kabbalah, I believe Rabbi Menachem Rakanti, that holds that the spheres are only figurative. They're not real. They're only like some people say about a calendar. Is a calendar a real measure of time, or it's only for us convenient for us to use that today is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday? So there are those that say that the spheres are not, they're imaginary spheres. They're only for us to be able to speak about how God is expressing himself. But there's no real substance. There's no real entity called a sphere. There is such opinions. The reason they hold this way is because they don't want to associate to God any mitzias davar, any type of specific definition and identity. The conclusion of Chassidus and the other deis is not that way. But there is such a day that the spheres are just basically like giving us a conceptual words to describe the divine expression. But based on the fact that there's Kalim in Atzilus, Kalim tells us that there's actual substance, not physical substance, spiritual substance, that there's actual identity, a thing called a sphere. It's not just for our language, for us to use to say, for us to understand how God is manifesting. Like, for example, there's a medrash that says, but asks the question about the names of God. So the medrash says, Lifi maisi ani nikra. God doesn't have any definition. You can't call God a warrior. You can't call God a chesed or gvura, a gibber. When you say in davening, we say, Hagodl v'hagibber, hagdula v'hagvura, v'atiferes v'netzach v'aheid. So the Medrash says these are just because of the actions. When God is in the mode of doing chesed, we call him Kael. When he's in the mode of doing gvura, we call him Elikim. But there's no real gvura. But what he's saying here, the Kalim of Atzilus tell us, because what would be Kalim? If it was only Eiris, you could say that perhaps. That the Eiris is just an imaginary type of divine energy that doesn't have real definition. It's only how God manifests through his actions. There are problems with this opinion, but there's such an opinion. Kalim tell you there's a Metzias Davar, there's an actual entity called Chesed of Atzilus. or Chochma v'Atzilus. So that's what it says. Metzias davar shari yeshem l'sesfiris b'metzias. In Hebrew, you say that the sesfiris manifest, they exist in the metzias. You can call them an existing entity. If you wish to use quantum and indeterminism and determinism, you could say something like that as well. Then the quantum state, it's not determined one way or the other. But that's not the case in Atzilus. In Atzilus, it's deterministic. Chesed is chesed and not gvura. That's just another way of putting it.
What's quantum? Eichus?
No. I'm not going to go. If you don't know what quantum is, it's fine too. It's not relevant.
Just translate the word.
I can't translate the word. It's more than a word. It's a whole theory. Quantum is a amorphous state, a nebulous amorphous state when nothing has definitions yet. It's called the indeterministic state of probability. Does that help you?
Yuli.
Not exactly. Some say it's like Yuli, some say it's not. It's the state before you know that the person will be a zocher and a keva. What state would you call that?
Okay. Good.
It's hecher for a tziyur, it's before there's a tziyur. It's something like the Esses Sfiris Agnuzis, where Shmai Vaftalion are teaching, and Shammai takes out Gvura from it, Isur, L'chumra, and Hillel takes out Chesed, L'hokil. So how is it in Shmai Vaftalion's teachings? It's still in a state that it could go either way. Okay. Ubekalim behechrech lemer, and when you're talking about the kalim, you must say shehem bebchinas sfiris, that they're in real state of sfiris. There are real entities. They're real defined entities. And now he's going to qualify. The eich shenemer bebchinas ha'eres. However you explain the eres, and remember the eres is two opinions. Do they have siur, eres mitziarim, or are they completely pshutim, shapeless, seamless? So however you explain with the eres, im heim bebchinas pshitas legamri, whether the energies are completely shapeless, oy shegamba eres yashes sfiris, or also in the eres there's some form of 10 spheres, obviously in a more subtle form. So there the pshitas is only due, they're only in relation relative to the containers. As we explained at length earlier. He doesn't say at length. As explained earlier, this is in the first volume. At length, this was discussed. So regarding the Eris, however you say the Eris you can argue two opinions. Maybe they're completely shapeless, or they have some shape, but in relation to the containers, they're still shapeless. But with the Kalim, you can't say that. The Kalim don't have two such opinions. The Kalim is absolutely spheres, because that's what makes them a Kali. A Kali means it has substance. So if that's the case, they are in a state of metzias davar, of a substance. They have substance. It still doesn't mean they're not, it's a divine substance, we know. Remember, iyu v'garmu ichad, but it's substance. The ima yesem elikus mamish. He's going to qualify now. Page 1169. Even though these kalim, this substance of Chochma, Bina, and so on, are mamish elikus, nevertheless, they're a likus that manifests in a defined, existing entity. Or they come into a defined, existing entity. Mugbal. Now the other way around. But you can't say, God forbid, that they're mamish hagbola like biyah. I'm going to explain what that means. Let me just read to the end of the parentheses. And according to the opinion of the Pardes, he says, when it says that the measure of the 10 spheres is 10, but 10 that have no end, He's talking about the Kalim. Okay. The Pardes Shita is, yeah. So let me explain what it means. And then we'll stop here. In volume 1, he explained this paradox. When you say Esser Sefiros of Atzilus, I'm talking now the Kalim. We say Iyu v'garmu ichad. You are one with them. That means they are extensions of Elikus. We know Elikus on its own is not defined, it's not limited. And Kalim of Atzilus are. There's a measure. Chesed is not Gvura. There's a parameter. So how is that explained? So there's a few ways it's explained. I'll just give one right now, and then maybe tomorrow I'll give more of them. The one explanation is given like this, that it's true, it's chesed and not gvura, but the chesed is ein sof. It's unlimited kindness. In biyah, it's chesed is mugbal. So in other words, there's two elements of definition. You could say something is chesed and not gvura, but the chesed flows infinitely. That's an atzilus. In biyah, it's not just chesed and not gvura, the chesed does not flow infinitely. There's a limit to how much chesed will flow. So you have on one hand, it's Ein Sof, but only Ein Sof l'hispashtusan, which means in that kav, chesed will go. But the Eibush is koyach, I'll say eir hagvul, but here koyach hagvul. Kishem sheyesh lekechi bebilti bal gvul, kach yesh lekechi begvul. And what is the gvul? You could say the gvul is that it's chesed and not gvura. The Eibush has the power to do that. But the chesed is bli gvul. So that's why he says it's not hagbala mamish. That's one way to explain it. Another way to explain it is that even the chesed and not gvura is not a true hagbala. It's only God wants right now to channel the energy through chesed. But it's not a gvul mamish as in a true limited parameter. In biyah, chesed is limited, real limitation. In Atzilus, chesed is only God's choice to manifest through chesed and not through gvura. So therefore, in that sense, it's not gvul mamish. It's gvul as in terms of what God wants, but not so much that a real defined state was created. Now, it needs more explanation. There's a muscle for this as well from writing. You have the capacity to write infinitely with your fingers. So when you write Aleph Beis, that doesn't limit the fact that you can write a lot more. Like we speak about, the artist has infinite possibilities. Even when the artist is making one piece of art, he still has infinite possibilities. He's just not doing that right now. He's manifesting it through one channel, through Esser Sefiros. But either way, the main point he wants to make here is that the Kalim of Atzilus, however you explain the Oyer, which we're not discussing right now, which way the Oyer is seen, but Kalim for sure have a form of Metzias Mugbal. However, in the Hagbal itself, there's levels of what Gvul really means. Like, for example, when you say on earth, we have true Gvul. You cannot jump up 50 feet. Whatever you'll do, you'll never be able to do that. You know, we all have limitations that are not relative, they're fundamental limitations. Al pi halacha, a person cannot go 3 days without drinking, 7 days without eating. That's not up to us. We're defined. The same gvul, that's the shadish of our gvul. If you said B'Tselem Elikim, we were created B'Tselem Elikim. How about the structure and Atzilus of the image of the divine that we are created in? Does it have that Hagbala? Does Elikus have a limit like that? Like you can't eat, it must eat or drink, mortal limitations? No. So the word limitation has many, many meanings. Limitation could be, the most limitation, of course, is in this world. But as you go to the higher worlds, limitation takes on different meanings. So this needs more elaboration. I need more time to explain. But I'm just planting the seed that he's explaining here, that there is already a limit in Atzilus, but it's not yet the limitations and the finite parameters that come in lower worlds. So we need to understand what that means. But bottom line is, he wants to make the case that Kalim of Atzilus are Metzias Davar, and therefore they relate to the existence of the worlds. So the finite nature of existence is beginning to take real shape and form in Atzilus through the Kalim.
But he said that even the Oiros in the beginning, he said that the whole Atzilus hein bishvil olam es biyah.
But now he's talking about the Kalim. He started a new section. Remember I said V'gam.
So
Now he's
that's not
talking about the Kalim. We're not talking about Eris right now. He says, however you explain the Eris, we're talking about Kalim. So we'll get back to the Eris. First, let's follow the Rebbe Rashab's lead. He's explaining Kalim. So we're going to cover Kalim, and then we'll talk about Eris. Remember, the Kalim are it's what he says, V'gam Kalim. Okay.
It's
So
3
stop
days
it, stop it.
without sleeping and 7 days without eating and drinking. 3 days without sleeping, it's impossible. 7 days without eating and drinking.
Look it up. Look it up. I don't think you can go 3 days without more than 3 days without drinking.
But I think the concept of 3 days is sleeping.
Without eating for 7 days, if they have water.
You can't go 7 days without water. Anyway, look it up.
Water. If they have water, people that fast for weeks.